ladies and gentlemen, it is my dear friend, Paul Casella.
Hi, how you doing out there? When Luis had asked me to do this, he kind of caught me by surprise because I haven't really been able to write a documentary or write a history about myself. I don't think of myself that way, but we're going to do the best we can, or I'm going to do the best I can to let you know a little bit about me and how I got started. I was born in 1951 in Brooklyn, New York, and I was raised by two parents. They were both Italian, my mom and dad. They both were born here, they're second generation. And I went to school in Greenpoint and Canarsie. I spent time back and forth. My father had family in Canarsie. We lived there for a period of time. And my mom had family in Greenpoint, Williamsburg area, which is where I actually spent a lot of my life later on. I guess I grew up like anybody else. I went to school every day. We listened to the radio, AM radio, and that was the hot thing back in the 60s. And the top 40 records were what we were used to hearing, and that's what all we thought music was back then, was what we heard on the radio. When I got to be about 17 or 18 years old, I became able to travel into the city, started coming into New York, and started to find out that there was a lot more than just the radio music out there. There was a lot of other music out there. There were some clubs that we used to go to. One in particular that I liked was a place called the Electric Circus. It was down on St. Mark's Place and 2nd Avenue. It was a few blocks away from the old Fillmore East, that you know what that was, I'm sure. Anybody that knows New York knows of the Fillmore East and the concerts they used to have down there. But I gravitated more toward the Electric Circus, which was more of a discotheque sound. It had an incredible light show, a really great sound system, and there were a couple of live bands there, but that wasn't the mainstay of the evening. It was dance music as prepared by a disc jockey. And back then, there was really no rhythm or rhyme to how they presented the music. A lot of the stuff they played was danceable, but it wasn't really presented in any format. It was just the records that people liked, that they liked. They would put on, and we would dance to them. And it was a great scene. It was kind of like the beginnings of the whole dance scene in New York. There were other things going on which I wasn't really privy to in other parts of the city. But for me, that was where I more or less got my start. I spent a lot of weekends at the Electric Circus and met some people that worked there. I met the disc jockey and some of the light people and some of the people that hung out there. And it seemed like they were like a crowd that liked progressive dance music, that liked the high energy and that lifestyle, that being out late, dancing and partying lifestyle. So as clubs opened up in the city, there was always a small venue that would open up somewhere uptown, 59th Street, down on 61st Street. A club opened up called Machine, the old Empire Hotel. There was a group of us that would gravitate towards the clubs and check them out, and I can't really call it a cult. I don't think it was a cult. But it was a group of about 400 or 500 people that would make the rounds to all the new clubs. They'd always try and get there. A lot of them were gay, and a lot of them were straight. There was a combination of both. There were clubs that were specifically gay, and there were clubs that were specifically straight. But most of the clubs that I went to in the beginning had both elements in it. They had gay and straight. And I never had a problem with that. We seemed to get along fine. It was just great to have a good time, to go out and have a good time. There were a couple of other clubs that I went to back then. There were a lot of them, don't get me wrong. But the ones that come to mind are after the Electric Circus, I would say, there was this club called Machine. Then we bounced around to a lot of clubs. There was one called Together down by the 59th Street Bridge. There was the Jungle. Everybody knows about the Jungle. Alfie used to play there. The DJ's name was Alfie, really nice guy. There was Forbidden Fruit. There was a club called Huntington Hartford Dance Club. It was down on Lexington Avenue and 53rd Street. All these clubs had a nice little, they usually got like a 1-year run and to 6 month to 1 year run, and then another place would open up and we would move down to there. Now, I was strictly hanging out and having a good time, but I always kind of would gravitate towards the DJ booth and the music they were playing because of my love for it. So the first fellow I think that impacted me as far as, or maybe it was more that I was able to get pretty close to, was Francis Grasso at the Sanctuary when he was working the Sanctuary. And the Sanctuary, excuse me, the Sanctuary was at that in its day. It was such a big deal because it was the first time ever, I think, that they took a church, which was a religious institution, of course, and they made a nightclub out of it. So just the connotations that you get from that, going somewhere and to dance in a sacred room with the DJ at the altar who was like running things like a priest would say mass, it was a great image. The imagery was really good, really nice. It was real incredible, actually. And that had a big effect on me. I became friends with Francis, who was a legend, as we know, and just from watching and being in the environment, I always knew that this was something I wanted to try and do. So I started picking up bits and pieces of records that were being played. And by the way, none of the songs that were played at that time were on the radio. It was strictly an underground dance club format. Almost 90% of the songs that you heard at the clubs on Friday nights, Saturday nights, and during the week, and the after-hours clubs, and everything that went on with the crazy nightlife in New York, back then you never heard on the radio. They would get put, later on, they would start to get put on the radio because the radio realized the viability of the music and how popular it was becoming. And then they started to play it, which led to the disco thing, and we'll get to that a little later. So I started to form my own record collection. I had some of the songs that I tried to get as many of the songs names. Back then, the DJs used to black out the record copies because they didn't want people having the hot song that they had. And eventually, I was able to develop a library that I thought was big enough for me to start practicing. And I actually did it in my basement in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, off Metropolitan Avenue, and where I owned a house. So I was down in the basement, used to go down there for hours, would get the records out, listen to them, get a pen and pad, write them down, and write down where I thought they belonged in sequence with other records, to try and make something, a little bit of a playlist that worked smoothly. And about 1970, I got a break. I was out in Queens, at a bar out in Queens, and the fella told me that he was opening up a club on Woodhaven Boulevard, right in Forest Hills, called the Menagerie. Small room, about 100 people it held, but he had a really good sound system. He had Rosner do the sound system. It was this Rosner's it was Rosner's staple sound system back in the days. He would use the two 1200s. I don't even think they were out yet, but he would use Technics turntables and 2 Macintosh amps and 4 Bose 901 speakers for a basic system. If you didn't want to go crazy and spend thousands of dollars, that would get you through a pretty good party. So I got hired as the DJ at this club called the Menagerie. It was right off Woodhaven Boulevard and the Long Island Expressway. Inside of a month or 2 months, like I said, the club only held probably 100 people legally. The fire limit for the bathrooms, you know how that works. We were putting 600 people in the place. They couldn't fit in the room. They were outside on the streets, hanging out on cars with their drinks or whatever they could do. And the owner was needless to say, the owner was very pleased. And I worked there for about 6 months to a year. Every weekend, the place did, fantastically, between 400 to 600 people every Friday and Saturday night. And it got a nice run. And I started to develop from being behind the tables so often for six hours a night. You just start to develop a fluidity that eventually becomes your personality. The owners of a club called the Menagerie, which was the next club that I worked at, were in the club one night. That's a little bit further up Queens Blvd, closer to the city, down on 43rd, right underneath the L. And they approached me and asked me if I was interested in coming to work for them. And when they opened, they were setting everything up. So I told them when the time came to speak to me, and we would see what would happen. And I eventually ended up getting the job there. Now, most people that know of me, I imagine that is where it started. That's the club where people first started to recognize me as a professional. So, it was good for me, but I had been doing it for about a year or two earlier than that, but that was the first club where I got major recognition because of the fact of its popularity, its proximity to the city, where people from New York will actually take a cab over into Queens to come and hear me play. I've had Ben Vereen from Pippin, to play Pippin at the club. He commented and came to see me out there. To get somebody from New York to travel to Queens was a big deal back then, to come and actually see you play, because New York always had the reputation of having the nightlife. They didn't need to go to Queens. So for me to have someone like Van McCoy come out to the club, which he did, David Todd from RCA Records, the promotional man from RCA Records, who later on became a real close friend after he had heard me play. He was a disc jockey himself, and he became a very close friend. People like that coming to the club and then getting entertainment like Sister Sledge at the time, Gloria Gaynor, the people that made the circuit that would be performing there. It was kind of a big deal back then, because most of the time, most of these artists were always considered New York as the hot spot for nightlife. Now, I also had people that would travel from other towns and come up to the city and then drive out to Queens and hear me play. In particular, a personal friend, a fellow who became a personal friend, again, his name is Wayne Geftman, and he was became the owner of the largest club in Philadelphia. He opened up his own place a few years later after meeting myself. I helped him develop the concepts. It was called The Second Story, and he also opened a loft-like club up in Philly called the Catacombs, an after-hours club that stood open till noon and through the very similar parties for the people that party down in Philly. He used to travel up I-95, the Turnpike, and come to New York 90 miles and then drive to Queens to come and see me play. And I was always very flattered about that. And I asked him one time why he did it, and he said, it's the music. It's just the music. He said, there's nobody playing it the way you play it in the city. I've been to all the clubs in the city. That's why every weekend I come up here. It's the music. I enjoy what you do better than anybody else I've heard, which was a big compliment. And then we became close, like I said, and whatever. He became a very big club owner down in Philly. To this day, he's still well remembered. One of his disc jockeys, Frank Sestito, still working today. And I'd like to say, hi, Frank, how you doing? If you get to watch this, I'm doing the best I can. Anyway, there were a couple of clubs in the city that were going on, that had been opening also. While the Monastery was open, I also had a couple of weeknight gigs. I used to work 4 nights at the Monastery. So what I did was I had 3 nights left to the week, and I was able to get a job at a place on 45th Street called Hollywood. Hollywood was the next club, I believe, after the Sanctuary had closed down. A few clubs after that, like I said, they opened club after club after club. It was a few clubs later, and it was a really good club, kind of a small room with a great sound system. But the concept of Hollywood was the DJ that kind of put it all together was Joe Parliamentary. He's also another legend of vinyl. I'm sure you can read about. Really nice dude, and I met him myself, and he put together the lineup for the 7 nights a week. The club was open 7 nights a week. It was right on 45th Street, and he put together the lineup. So what I managed to do is we all the DJs took a night. We had a good group of guys working, and we each took a night, and we each got to play for one night out of the week. So who we had was Joe. Joe was the weekend guy because he was the head man there. Then we had Frank Stravelli, who was an excellent disc jockey that worked out in Queens, who was a personal friend of Joe's, who I met through Joe, and he worked a real hot gay club in Queens, which I never even heard of until I met him, and I visited a few times, and it was really a nice room. The name of the club evades me right now, but Frank Stravelli I'm sure you'll read about him somewhere along the way, and you'll be able to find out. It was a really good room, and he was an excellent DJ. Then there was Tony Gio. He was another personal friend, and he had a night there. And we had Richie Kazar, who everybody knows who Richie Kazar is. So between the 5 of us, we kind of handled the whole week, and it was interesting because if you had a night off, you can go down and listen to someone else play, and that's one of the things that none of us really got to do that often because we were always working. Saturday night and Friday night, and then if you worked a couple of nights during the week, you really never got a chance to go listen to anyone else play and get a different perspective on their delivery or how they handled the room. So it was basically interesting for me to be in that environment. I think that really helped me grow from watching other guys and getting a semblance of how they handled the turntables and handled the room. That had a lot to do, I think, with helping me grow at a faster pace than I know I would have had I not worked there. So Hollywood kind of was responsible to me, I give it a lot of credit, as responsible for moving me forward as far as the craft goes a lot more quickly. Let me see. The Monastery eventually, we'll go back to the Monastery for a minute. I met a lot of people that used to come and hang out there that eventually ended up becoming students of mine. Jenny Costa was one of them. Jenny now works for KTU. She's been playing for the last 30 years. She started out there. I more or less got her behind the turntables and gave her start. Tony Santorino, who's another very good DJ who's still working today. I met Luis at the Monastery. Luis actually, I didn't know, but Luis actually told me that he met his wife Ricky at the Monastery one night while I was working. Jack McCloy from Long Island, who runs the Long Island Disc Jockey Pool, actually met his wife Lee at the monastery. So a lot of things happened that I really didn't know about and found out along the way as the years went on that I was kind of responsible for. And it's all good. It's all good. It's a good thing. I'm really happy with the way life has been, as far as me and the way my life has gone. I'm pretty happy about the way things developed and where I am right now. So let's keep moving. Let's move a little forward now. The monastery closed down eventually. I got like a 3-year run at the monastery. I made a couple of trips to Europe while in the summer months when things slowed down a little bit, and I was able to pick up some records because that's basically all I did back then. And I was in Spain for 3 weeks. We picked up some songs, and while we were vacationing, and brought them back, and we had songs like Tom the Peeper and Angel Eyes, Angel Face, Glitter Band, Angel Face, Dance Master, things like that. Old classics that weren't being played and nobody knew about, but they were over there in Europe sitting in the record stores. So I brought them back and we started using them. There was 3 or 4 other songs, but it was just, like I said, it's just what we did. We ate, slept, and did everything with music. Wherever we went, that was always the main concern. Where are we going to get our records? Where can we pick up more product? Where's the next big song going to come from? So the monastery closed down, and what they did was they tried to revamp the club and open it up again to get a fresh start. And I moved on to a club that I was working Monday nights at that time for the owners of the monastery, and a couple of other people that hung out there opened up a club on Monday nights for the bar crowd and the hairdressing crowd, because Sunday and Monday, basically, it was a good fit, because Sunday and Monday are basically nights that the bar people, bartenders, waitresses, DJs, haircutting people are all off, because Saturday is their big money day, so they're all working. So we decided to try this thing on Monday night at a club called Ripple on the Water, and it turned out to be a huge success. Just opened on Mondays, and the place was doing 700 and 800 people inside of 6 months. It took about a month or 2 to get the flow, but once we got the word out and people came in and saw the place, it was a very pretty room, and the sound system was real solid. They loved it. So I worked there on Monday nights, and I eventually got a call from one of the parking lot attendants, believe it or not, who I was close with. If you know me at all, let me back up. If you know me at all, and anyone that does know me, I've never been a prick to anybody. I don't feel that way. I never tried to have the DJ ego. If someone come up to the DJ booth, I've always tried to be personable, and I tried within reason, because I'm working, but I've always tried to be myself, and that really paid off and later on in life, as I found out. But I didn't do it for that reason. That's just who I am. So I was very friendly with the fella that parked the cars in the parking lot at Ripple on the Water, and he had the concession at the Douglaston golf course up on Marathon Parkway. And what happened, a funny thing happened, is that Steve Rebell had just got a cabaret license and was leasing the golf course, the building for the golf course, the clubhouse. And that's where he opened up he got the license, and he opened up this club, Enchanted Garden. The fella that worked, and his name was Frank, the fella that worked in the parking lot, he was to always talk me up about how good I was, which I didn't know at the time, but that's what he was doing. And Steve had already picked his disc jockeys when he opened the club. Originally, the club was just supposed to be a restaurant. Steve owned a chain of restaurants. Steve and Ian Schrager, his partner, owned a chain of restaurants called the Steak Loft. I don't know if you remember back then. Back then, it was it was similar to the Steak and Brews, and it was out about the same time as the Steak and Brew, which was the first restaurants which are now developed into like what you would consider Outback. They were called Steak and Brew, and Steve's restaurant chain was called the Steak Loft. They were like McDonald's and Burger King back then, but for a steakhouse. So Steve had about 7 or 8 spots in New York, and he went to the Douglaston Golf Course, and he developed this. He got the cabaret license to open up the restaurant, but he didn't tell them that he was planning to put a disco in. He told them he was putting a restaurant in. So when he had Richard Long come in and do the system, and he opened the place up, and the music started playing, the whole neighborhood went crazy. And there were demonstrations out in front of the building, and they were trying to get him closed down. And needless to say, he had loopholes to circumvent all of that, but that's how that originally started. It was a big problem for the neighborhood in the beginning. But the building was beautiful. It looked like a castle. The club was incredible in its day. So he had Nicky Ciano and David Rodriguez and Nick Ciano were his DJs that worked there. And as great as they are and as great as they were, Steve wasn't happy because he wasn't getting the crowd that he wanted. And back then, I had a pretty strong following in that area. So Frank, the fella from the parking lot, had gotten Steve's ear and said, "Why don't you listen to this kid Paul play? This guy Paul play? Everybody listens to him. They rave about him, and he might be able to help you out." So I met Steve, I met Ian, I did the audition, and they hired me. I started working the weekends there, and we built the place up to be magnificent. We were putting 1,500 people a night in the place. But like I said, my style was a little different than Nicky's and David's at the time. So I don't know if that was the reason, or it was because I was popular in the area and I had a following, but it made the club a huge success. So I worked for Steve Rebel and for about 3 years, and that was interesting. He was using this club as a prelude to opening Studio 54. He used to talk to me about it all the time. In a year or so, we're going to do something in New York. It's going to be the hottest club in the world. He didn't know it was Studio 54 at the time. But he had a couple of buildings picked out that he was looking at. One of them was Studio 54. The other one was the Terrace Tavern on the Green up on 72nd Street in Central Park on the west side. And I think there was one other location that he eventually said he wasn't going to use. So as it got close to him opening the club, he eventually decided, I think because of the logistics, to open up Studio 54 because of the movie theater and style of it. Tavern on the Green was more of a outside. It was beautiful inside, but it had these outside patios and things like that, where Studio was an enclosed, I think it was more suited for what he wanted with the balconies, and he could do more with developing the lights and the sound system in the club. And it was already a movie theater, so it probably had much better acoustics than Tavern on the Green. So that's as far as what I remember, that's the reason he chose to go with the clubs. But I got pretty friendly with Steve and Ian, and from working for them. They were both two very nice people. Steve was a little quirky. Everybody that knows who Steve was knew that he was a character. He was a lot of fun to be around, but he was also pretty strict, and he was a pretty tough boss to work for at times. I remember him in the beginning of the nights, he'd always be strictly business, and then about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, I'd look down onto the dance floor because the DJ booth was in an overhead area where you could look down and see the dance floor, and I'd see Steve sitting in one of the bass speakers listening to me play. And he used to send up one of the busboys or come up himself, and he'd ask me to play like Love Hangover, Diana Ross, or something like that, which was one of his favorites. He was a big Diana Ross fan, and he really loved Mick Jagger. He was one of his biggest things was he wanted to meet Mick Jagger, which he eventually got to do. He used to always tell me about that. And I enjoyed my time there. I had a good time. It was a great club. We did a lot of good things there. One of the things that nobody realized, that if anyone had been to the club and you can go back that far, at the time I was working the lights also and doing the spinning. And I was spinning on Thorin's turntables, which are probably the hardest turntables any DJ has ever had to spin on. If you guys out there that know, there's guys out there that know, all you guys know, the 1200s were a piece of cake compared to the Thorin's turntables. But if you can get them, you can spin on them, you get a love for them. But I was also doing the lights at the same time. So I was working pretty hard. I used to come out of there with, I used to have to bring a couple extra T-shirts with me every night because it was pretty hot up in the loft, and I earned my money. My friend Wayne from Philadelphia came in a couple of times to Enchanted Garden, and that's right around the time he was planning to open his club down in Philly, and he took a lot of the ideas that he saw there and kind of like relocated them, some lighting that he liked and things like that. And I helped him locate people that could set him up. I think he had Alex Rosner do the sound system down there. He was talking with Richard also, but I think he ended up going with Alex Rosner. I'm not positive about that, but it was one or the other. I know that. After I worked at Enchanted Garden, when Steve was getting ready to do the grand opening at Studio, we spoke about me possibly going over to Studio and working, and there was an issue. Steve wanted to open the club as strictly a gay club, and me not being gay, he said that he felt that he couldn't really use me in the room when at the grand opening, and that he wanted me up the road probably to do some guest spots and things like that. But I wasn't picked to be the opening DJ. But he picked somebody very capable, Richie Kazar, who ended up doing the grand opening at Studio, which I was there opening night, and Richie was wonderful. We had a great time. He really wowed the crowd, and parties like that just make themselves. But Richie was a fantastic DJ. There's not much more you can say. Anyone that heard him play knew his talent. He was one of the special ones. And so not getting the gig at Studio 54, naturally I was crushed. So what I did was I started to look around, and my friend Jack McCloy from Long Island had a gig that he wanted me to check out. He says, Paul, I know you've never worked in Long Island, and I don't know if you would consider going out there, but somebody's doing a really nice club out there, and he's spending a lot of money, and maybe you should take a look at it. So I took a ride with him, and I went out to this club on Hempstead Turnpike. The owner of the club was a fella that had restaurants, Italian restaurants that were very popular out in the area, in the Nassau County area. He had 2 or 3 of them. And he was doing his first nightclub cabaret, restaurant cabaret, and the place was beautiful. It was called Decameron, and we sat down and spoke, and I ended up securing the job there, and I worked. That's where I spent like 3 or 4 years, the next 3 or 4 years, working out there. It was a 5-day-a-week gig, and it was 25 miles away, so I kind of lost a lot of contact with a lot of what was going on in the city. Because, like I said, working out in Long Island and working 5 days a week, it's kind of difficult to really keep touch with what's going on and who's playing what, and to get out and actually have a night out to yourself. It took me a long time to find out who Mr. Bill was from Saturday Night Live. I never knew who he was because back then I was working every Saturday and Sunday, and Friday and Wednesday, and Saturday Night Live was a show I didn't know existed until probably the mid-'80s. And when people used to kid around about it, I would go, "Who's Mr. Bill?" And they're like, "Come on, you don't know who Mr. Bill is? He's at the little the little Muffet thing on Saturday Night Live. And it was just that, you know, my point being, we're always working. So there's things that you miss out on Saturday night. So my relationship in respect to what was going on in New York kind of changed a little bit from being out on Long Island. But I always had the record pool stuff, going into the city and picking that up, phone calling. But there's nothing like actually, to me, there's nothing like actually being in the scene, being there. That always did a lot for me as far as my motivation and my creativity. When we were working at the monastery, to step back a little bit, and we did the thing at Hollywood, a lot of the DJs started to become more familiar with each other. We actually started it became like a little community of guys. There was about 2 dozen of us that were all pretty much working and visiting the record companies every Friday to get our new product from people like David Todd and the other record promo people that would give us the stuff that we were using. Well, somewhere along the way, we decided that it would make more sense for us to approach the record companies and see if we could work some kind of a system out where we didn't have to spend all day Friday running around trying to get product from all the different record companies. So what it developed into was a concept of if we can make sure that everyone is legitimate and we can legitimize everybody as far as their professionalism and that they're working, and guarantee the record companies that everybody they were giving the product to was a viable DJ, we would be able to get them to send us the product. And that idea, which originally was developed by David Mancuso and Steve D'Acquisto, and I was involved in it, but it was basically Steve's idea. Steve D'Acquisto actually came up with the idea. And we spoke about it, and everybody thought it was a great idea. And that's how we formed. We met at David at the Loft at 99 Prince Street, and there were 20 or 25 of us. Jack McCloy, Tony Gio, David Mancuso, Steve D'Acquisto, Michael Capello, and so forth. Richie Kazar, Joe was there. We all decided that we were going to write something up, a form letter, and bring it to the record companies and tell them that we would like them to send us the product, because it would give us a lot more time to listen to the product, and it would help us creatively, where we wouldn't be spending time running around to 5 or 6, spending a whole half day or a day visiting everybody, visiting 10. In Manhattan, there were literally about 10 big record companies. There was CBS, there was RCA, there was Motown, there was Epic, there was 7 or 8 or 9 companies that you had to visit every week, and then go to the record stores like Downstairs Records and Vinyl Mania and Colony Records and pick up whatever they had that was coming in, that imports and things that you had to go listen. It was just a daunting task. It became a daunting task. It was enjoyment and it was a love that we all had to do, but we realized that it was taking away from us being able to be creative and actually listen to the records and spend our time more efficiently. So we came up with this letter, and Steve D'Acquisto, David Mancuso, and myself signed it, and it was the first record pool charter, the 99 Prince record pool charter, which my signature is at the bottom of, and that's how 99 Prince Street, which is the first record pool, really got started. David Mancuso was kind enough to offer the basement of his Loft Club to use in the beginning, and that's where we created bins for all the members, and that's where we would distribute the DJ material as it came in. And the record companies really liked the idea because they didn't have to have 15 or 20 or 30 DJs coming in and taking up their time. So they would just send the product. 30 copies or how many DJs we had in our pool. They sent us 30 of each of the product they wanted to promote, and it ended up becoming a wonderful idea. Jack was at the meeting, Jack McCloy, who's the head of the Long Island DJ pool, and he's also a disc jockey for years. It started out with myself, did a lot of his work on Long Island, and is still out there. And he was at the meeting, the original record pool meeting, and when we finished, I spoke with him about what he thought, and he said that he didn't really want to get involved. He didn't think it was good for him being on Long Island to become a member of this pool because of his logistics being far out in Nassau, and the fact that he had a lot of disc jockeys that worked out there that were trying to do exactly the same thing that we were doing, which was get product from the record companies, and they also had to legitimize themselves and prove that they were working for a legitimate nightclub that has a reasonable crowd, that it wasn't just some bar with 20 people in it and they were going to give you free records. That's the whole deal. So Jack said that he was going to, he wasn't going to become a member of our pool, but he had made plans to open up his own pool out on Long Island. He wanted to give it a shot. And he got his people together, the disc jockeys that he was familiar with out there, and he opened up the Long Island record pool, which, if I remember correctly, is the longest running record pool ever. And Jack had opened it about 6 months to a year after 99 Prince Street pool, and it's still in existence today. So that's definitely true. It is the longest running pool, and it is still in existence. And so that was his reasoning behind not coming on board. And I don't think he regrets it. I think he's very happy about the decision that he made. After we finished doing the record pool stuff, it began to grow, and it began to become more successful. More people around the country decided to give it a shot. They saw that it was a successful thing, so they decided to give it a shot. And record pools like For the Record and other associations opened up. Eddie Rivera took the 99 Prince Street pool and he moved it to Broadway and 18th Street. And what were we called? What was the name of our pool? IDRC. That became the IDRC record pool. Right. Right. And then For the Record was Judy Weinstein. Right. And that was basically the first. We were the first 2 or 3 big pools. 99 Prince Street, the Long Island record pool, and then IDRC took over from 99 Prince Street, and Judy opened up For the Record. And from there, it just took off. As far as with myself, I continued working out on Long Island for approximately 4 years, and then I started to pick up gigs. When the club started winding down, I started picking up gigs at wherever. There was plenty of work for me at the time. Wherever I wanted to work, I could get a day. I did some work in the Hamptons a couple of summers. I did some work down the Jersey Shore. If I went down to Jersey Shore, I worked at the Surf Club a couple of times with Ron Rella and some of the DJs down there. So there was always something, a night or two that I can get somewhere. I started to do a lot of after-hours work, which I really enjoyed, because that's where a lot of the real parties went on. And back then, they didn't have the driving while intoxicated DWI laws, so people could literally drink the whole night and then drive home without worrying about getting pulled over. So there was a club on 26th Street that I started to work at called the Top Floor / Rooftop. And it was on the 10th floor of a building on 26th Street right off 7th Avenue, and the building isn't there anymore. It was demolished for a high-rise building which exists today. But back then, people used to come from New Jersey at 2 o'clock in the morning. The club opened at midnight and stood open till 7 in the morning. And there was a $10 cover, and they had an open bar. You can get bar scotch, bar vodka, not top shelf, but you can drink and all you wanted until the club closed for $10. So people out in Hoboken and people in Jersey City and across the river used to gravitate right through the Lincoln Tunnel. The club was 10 blocks from the Lincoln Tunnel, and at 2 o'clock in the morning, the place would get packed. They'd have 400, 500 people that would come in right at that time and party till 7. The club closed at 7, and we had to throw everybody out. Nobody wanted to leave. It was that type of a situation. And there were a few other places that I worked at like that along the way. I worked at a club up in Harlem on 109th Street and First Avenue. It was a Latin after-hours club. And I DJ'd. The place opened at midnight. And the strange thing I remember about that was that up there, they had a metal detector. When you walked in, you had to go through literally like an airport metal detector. And if you had a gun or something with you, they didn't ask you to leave. They just asked you to check it so that you didn't have to carry it in the club. So they had a gun check besides a coat check in the club. And I worked there for about 8 months to a year. The club, I used to get out of there at 11 o'clock in the morning because the club had Latin bands, and the bands didn't do their first set till 4 o'clock in the morning. That was when they went on. So it was from midnight to probably 11 the next day, every Friday and Saturday. And I did a lot of gigs like that. About somewhere along the way in there, I got in touch with Luis, and Luis Orlano told me that he was opening up a progressive dance club. The music started to change. I think my own opinion on that is that the disco movement and the disco club scene became so popular that it kind of became an overkill thing, and dance music just was being played everywhere. The radio stations picked it up, and it just became overbearing for a lot of people. And that's where you started seeing the hatred for disco. We hate disco. Disco's dead stuff, and there was a right for it because music constantly changes, and we need to adapt as artists and as presenters of it. We need to adapt along with that. That has always been my feeling. So the music started to change more into a new wave and a rock movement, and Luis had gotten involved with Pat Kenny, Don Hill, and Roy Webb, and they were opening up a place down on 13th Street, which was going to be a progressive dance club called the Cat Club. And Pat Kenny was the owner of the Bitter End and Kenny's Castaways down on Bleecker Street in the Village. Don Hill was a very well-known club manager, and he had a lot of influence with rock and roll, a lot of stars. He had a lot of connects, and he was a manager for a couple of bands, and he knew a lot about that end of the business. So between the two of them, they got some great entertainment. They had people like Billy Idol coming into the club. The gentleman from Dire Straits. The guitarist for Dire Straits was a personal friend of Don Hill's. He was there a lot. Joe Jackson had been at the club. Michael Douglas and some famous actors and actresses you'd always see a familiar face sitting and watching the party. And the club was very successful. Luis was working the weekends. David Azark worked one night there, and I had a couple of weeknights there in the beginning, and we eventually moved around and swapped nights, which was at our convenience. And David Azark, who was the DJ from Mud Club days, an excellent player, got opened up the Limelight, which was on 20th and 6th. So through knowing David, I was able to secure a night there. And that's what I did basically from 84 until 1987, and 3 or 4 nights a week, and continued working basically myself, I guess I didn't realize it at the time, but I was winding things down as far as my career goes. In 1987, I got married. I started working during the day, and I kind of slowed down with the working at night. I was starting to develop a hearing problem. I was starting to get getting like headaches from coming home a little bit like late at night every night. And I don't know if I just needed a break, or I needed to get to see a doctor about it, but I never did. And when I got married, I made a decision to phase out of doing it and start my family. I was 35 years old, and I felt it was my time. And I married my wife, Stacy, who I met at the Cat Club when I was working with Luis. I worked one night. She came in and was hanging out there, and I met her, and we later on and got married. And I have 3 wonderful children who I'm very proud of, and I'm married to this day. And I don't know what else to tell you. I think that's about the story. That's about the story of it.
Story there, Paul.
I'm very happily married. The 3 of them are, my kids are 25. My daughter Stephanie is 25. My son Paul is 24. And I have a son Anthony who's 18. So there you have it. And I don't regret a thing. It's been a wonderful life.
It's a beautiful
Talk to me.
My brother.
Thank you.
Well, let me just want to thank you, because there's definitely a lot of wonderful points you just made, and we all wanted to hear a little bit more about it. I'm sure when the time comes, we are going to either document this and put it on a book, which is why we are doing this. Legends of Vinyl is definitely interested in getting to that point. Paul, let me ask you something. How do you feel about the new technology that is right now really not affecting us as pioneers, as disc jockeys that started with the vinyl and the love for the vinyl? And well, now technology is bringing us into the computers. Well, the CDs is already kind of history.
Right,
already,
MP3s, computers,
yeah, exactly.
and the flash drive.
How do you feel about that? Do you embrace the new technology?
I haven't I haven't really been that involved in any of it. I'm starting to get involved in it more and more now. But from what I've learned so far and what I've experienced so far, I think it's wonderful. I think the technology is wonderful. It's a different way, like they have everything computerized now, which gives a different way of programming your music, but it takes away a little bit from, because you got help with sync buttons and whatnot from mixing, the actual mixing. But to me, that just opens up new doors of creativity. There's other things to look for now.
Right, so the DJs that they're out there against all of these things, it's really not really that bad. It's really it's the creativity.
No, I think anything,
the music that you present is still the music.
Anything that makes us move forward progressively, I think, and brings us into the modern technology should be embraced. But I don't think it should be dependent on, like, because you have a sync button, this is how you play all your records, and you just match the beats per minute and put a song on. That, to me, is not creativity. Creativity is listening to the song that you want to play and then making it meaningful with the song that's on.
It's always telling the story.
Yes, try and take people on a journey somehow.
Exactly.
With the music, whether it's melodically or the vocals, or at some level, tell your story. Make the evening magic.
Right.
It's not beats per minute. It never was beats per minute.
What would you tell to the new generation that is very eager to find out? I'm sure, because you need to know the past in order to go forward. But what would you suggest them?
If I were working right now, and I know that there's so much product that's coming out, and it's so difficult to get around to listening to all of it, and you almost get to the point where you have to stop and just reprogram your brain to listen to some of the stuff, because it consumes you to the point where you don't even really know if the song you're listening to is something that you're really going to like. What I usually like to do is, when I get product, which thanks to you, you've been sending, I listen to it, the records, and there's like a large files. I listen to the records. When I hear something that I think I'm interested in, I take it and put it in a little playlist of my own, and I'll make a CD or a flash drive of it, and then I'll listen to it, maybe 10 or 15 songs that I like out of the playlist that I have that I think might be, and then I listen to them over and over again in my car. I'll take it with me and put it on my CD player in the car or my MP3 player in the house and listen to it when I'm on the treadmill at the gym. And I try and get the song. I try and get to a point where I can decide if the record is good enough for me to program, to put on.
Exactly. So
that's the only way I can do it, because one listen doesn't do it. Right. And then once I have the songs that I decide that I really like enough that I would program if I was working, then I start thinking about ways of presenting them to tell my story creatively, or where they belong. You understand? Whether it's rhythmically or vocally, or you want to talk about politics a little bit, if there's a song that says a little bit something about the human condition, things like that.
That's a very good point, Paul, about politics. You just back in the days when Marvin Gaye and Stevie Wonder even that was very involved in sending the message.
Right.
Why people listen? Because music is very powerful, and the new generation,
Absolutely.
And the kids remember.
Absolutely.
They listen to those lyrics. Do you think that artists should be a little more involved in sending these messages instead of creating these stupid,
right? Absolutely.
Stupid lyrics
right.
that there is now,
right.
Making no sense.
Absolutely.
Do you think that's important?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You put the pen down if you're not going to really do the work. Put the pen down. If you can't come up, if it's not something that you're passionate about, don't do it. Put the pen down. Yeah, there's got to be a passion. If there's no passion, it'll come out when you play. When you're in front of an audience, you'll know. People will know. People just sense it, the passion that you have. It's not just the energy. The energy is, everybody has the energy now because of the technology. But there's other ways of being creative and showing the passion that you have. And that's what I look for. That's what I look for.
How do you see the scene in 5 years from now? What do you have what do you think?
If I'm here?
Yourself, you're right. How do you see yourself in 5 years from now? Really?
If I'm here in 5 years, I think I have to think about that. I need to think about that. Well, we should revisit that thought, because I don't really know. I've been away from it for a long time, and I go out, but I've been away from actually being behind the turntables and doing this craft that we do for such a long time that I can't really give you a value or opinion about it right now.
Good enough. If you had a time machine,
I don't want to talk about something I'm not savvy to,
right. But let me ask you something. If you had a time machine, what year would you go back and why?
If I had a time machine?
Yeah. What year was the most, the year that you really impacted you, that really you have that your heart is there, and elaborate on that.
Probably, I'd like to get back in my 20s again somewhere and get back out there and have a little of the fun that I had back then at the clubs and experience that again. I think that was the music. That and also there's two things, and also it's from my perspective, and this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but from my perspective, it's like the birth of my kids and stuff, things like that. What passionate joys for me. Having a kid and being in love with somebody and having a kid it's just as much of a passionate experience as it's very similar to the love that we have for music. It's very similar. So that being said, like, you know, the joy that you experience when your children are born and you see them for the first time and all of that. It's very similar to the feeling that the feeling and the stuff that you have when you're out there on the dance floor, and when I was younger, the emotions that go through you when you're just doing your thing out there on the dance floor, doing what you love, having a good time, and play and my performing days, the first few years of when I was performing and starting to come into my own and actually seeing what I was capable of, what my capabilities were, and because it's when I used to play, it was I never really had like a set 30 songs to play tonight. It used to pop into my head, and you've experienced it with me. We've worked together. Last night, it just popped into my head, and we said, right, Patti LaBelle, and that's what I'm talking about. You understand?
Right.
It's a thought that pops into your head from what you're listening to, and you just know that that's the right thing. That's what you need to put on.
It's just that simple.
Yeah, right.
And it worked.
Yep.
But it's just I'm just thrilled to have you here with me.
Thank you.
First of all,
Thank you.
And I wanted to tell you how all throughout the years, I just learned a lot from you. That's that simple, and I appreciate it. I can tell that to the world that you have been a tremendous influence in me and a lot of people, a lot of these jockeys that I know, that they owe a lot for Mr. Casella.
Well,
because they listen. I remember going back and standing in the corner, listening to you, coming from the city, and listening to you because you fresh that wonderful introduction of making sense out of every record you play, and it to me was incredibly important. And then I went back to Manhattan. And I did the same thing.
Right.
I mean, I bits and pieces of
yeah,
this
well,
and that.
if
And
you see it
important.
makes sense, you thought it was made sense to you.
So
I can do this. Let me go do some homework, and I can do this.
Throughout the years, we all have a little. I'm very grateful that I had the opportunity to come and
thank you,
watch you and see you and become your friend, and we've been together for such a long time. And Paul, thank you so very much, and it is indeed my pleasure. And guys. DJ Paul Casella.
Thank you for listening.
I love this man.
Thank you for listening, and I hope I made you dance at one point back in the days. I hope something I played influenced you in any way. God bless you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much for everything.